That monstrosity is a permanent, unapproved auxiliary dwelling unit, and I will have it torn down brick by brick if I have to. The voice, a grating mix of cheap Chardonnay and self-importance, sliced through the tranquil Saturday afternoon air. I turned from the beautiful brick dome of my new pizza oven, the scent of curing mortar and fresh pine still hanging in the air, to see her standing there. Karen, the president of the Oakmont Estates Homeowners Association, had breached the invisible but universally respected perimeter of my backyard. She stood on my freshly laid patio stones, her considerable frame squeezed into a beige pantsuit that screamed suburban authority. Her arms crossed so tightly it looked like she was trying to give herself a hug of pure indignation. Beside her, a much smaller, nervous-looking man I recognized as Herb from the HOA board fidgeted with a clipboard, avoiding my gaze like it was a tax audit. I had a half-finished glass of iced tea on the prep counter, beads of condensation rolling down its side, and I took a slow, deliberate sip before I answered. The ice clinked. It was the only sound for a moment, a tiny bell tolling for the peace that had just been murdered. "Karen," I said, my voice level, betraying none of the cold fury coiling in my gut. "This is a pizza oven. It's for cooking. You know, pizza? With cheese? And last I checked, you need a warrant to come onto my property." She scoffed, a sound like a tire deflating. "Your property is governed by the Oakmont Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions, Mr. Miller. Article 7, Section B, Paragraph 4. Any permanent structure requires pre-approval from the Architectural Review Committee. This," she gestured with a dismissive wave of her hand, a hand adorned with rings that looked a little too tight, "was never submitted. Therefore, it's an illegal structure." I placed my glass down, the sound a sharp click on the granite countertop I'd installed myself. "It's an appliance, Karen. A large one, I'll grant you, but an appliance. It's no more a dwelling unit than your oversized gas grill over there." I nodded toward her house, visible through the trees, where a stainless steel behemoth the size of a smart car sat gleaming on her deck. Her face flushed a mottled, angry red. "Do not compare my state-of-the-art outdoor kitchen with this brick shack. This has a foundation, it has a chimney, it is a structure, and it is in violation. You have 72 hours to submit a retroactive application, which will be denied, and then 30 days to demolish it and restore the grounds to their original condition, or the fines will begin. $500 a day, Mr. Miller. And believe me, I will not hesitate to place a lien on your home." The threat hung in the air, thick and oily. A lien, the ultimate weapon of the petty tyrant. Herb finally looked up, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and what looked like an apology. He knew this was an overreach. I knew it. And Karen, in her power-drunk haze, was the only one who didn't see the abyss she was gleefully tap-dancing towards. I gave her a long, slow look, the kind a platoon sergeant gives a private who just dropped his rifle. "You've said your piece, Karen. Now get off my property." For a second, I thought she might actually explode, but she just gave a tight, vicious little smile. "The first violation notice will be in your mailbox on Monday. The clock is ticking." She turned, her orthopedic shoes grinding on my new pavers, and marched away, Herb scurrying behind her like a pilot fish attached to a very angry beige shark. I stood there for a long time, watching them go. The calm afternoon shattered. A lien on my home. All for a place to bake pizza with my family. This whole mess started because I needed a project. If you're watching this, I want you to hit that subscribe button, drop a comment, and let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever had your own HOA nightmare, share it below because misery loves company, and I've got a feeling we're not alone. Now, back to how this all began. After 20 years as an Army combat engineer, building things and, well, unbuilding things in less than ideal locations, civilian life felt quiet, too quiet. My hands, accustomed to the heft of tools and the precise language of blueprints, felt empty. My wife Sarah saw it. She saw the way I'd paced the house, the restlessness behind my eyes. I wasn't built for sitting still. One evening, scrolling through old photos from a tour in Italy, we saw a picture of a family gathered around a rustic, glowing brick oven in a Tuscan courtyard. Sarah pointed to it. "You could build one of those," she'd said, her voice soft but certain. You need something to build. It was like a light switch flipped on in my head. A mission. It wasn't just about the pizza, it was about the process. It was about digging the foundation, pouring the concrete slab, and feeling the reassuring weight of solid ground beneath my feet. It was about laying each fire brick with precision, the mortar a familiar gray language my hands understood. I spent 6 months on it. I researched refractory materials, thermal mass, and flue mechanics with the same intensity I once reserved for bridge demolitions. I drew up the plans myself, ensuring every angle and measurement was perfect. It wasn't just a project, it was therapy. It was a way to build something that brought joy instead of tactical advantage. It was a way to reclaim my own backyard, to create a space that was about warmth, family, and good food. The oven became the heart of our home. Every Friday night was pizza night. Our two kids, Emily and Josh, would help roll out the dough. Sarah would prepare the toppings, and my best friend Mike would come over with a six-pack of craft beer. Mike and I had been friends since high school, long before I went into the service, and he went into civil engineering. Now he was the head of the city's building and zoning department. He'd watch my progress with professional interest, occasionally offering advice on the proper mix for high-heat mortar or the best way to insulate the dome. "You know, Jack," he'd said one Friday, leaning against the counter as I slid a perfect margarita pizza onto a wooden peel, "if you ever get tired of retirement, I could use a guy with your attention to detail on my inspection team. This thing is built better than half the houses in this town." We'd laughed, but he was serious. He appreciated the craftsmanship. To him, it wasn't a brick shack. It was a beautifully executed example of masonry, a testament to skill and patience. And it was these Friday nights, the laughter of my kids, the smell of wood smoke and melting mozzarella, the easy camaraderie with my best friend, that Karen was threatening to demolish. She hadn't just declared war on a pile of bricks. She had declared war on my peace, and that was a mistake. A combat engineer knows how to build, but he also knows better than anyone how to dismantle. I was about to teach Karen the difference between a covenant and a tactical manual. The battle for the backyard had begun. The official notice arrived on Monday, just as she'd promised. It was delivered via certified mail, a classic power move designed to intimidate. The envelope felt heavy, thick with the weight of bureaucratic malice. I signed for it, thanked the mail carrier, and took it to the kitchen table, where Sarah was having her morning coffee. She looked at the envelope, then at me, her expression a mixture of concern and resolve. "So, it's official," she said. I slid it open with a knife. Inside was a multi-page document, printed on the HOA's faux parchment letterhead, complete with a gaudy embossed logo of an oak tree. The language was a masterclass in passive-aggressive legalese. It cited the same article and section Karen had spat at me, described my oven as a non-conforming structure, and detailed the fine schedule. $50 per day for the first 30 days, escalating to $100 per day thereafter. Retroactive to the date of the violation discovery. At the bottom in bold was the threat of legal action, property liens, and the recovery of all attorney's fees from me, the homeowner. They had even included a grainy, zoomed-in photo of my oven, likely taken by Karen herself from her deck. A piece of surveillance that felt deeply violating. $500 a day is what she said, I remarked, my voice calm as I scanned the document. She's already backtracking, or maybe Herb talked her down. Either way, this is the opening salvo. Sarah put her hand over mine. "What do we do, Jack?" Her strength had always been my anchor. She wasn't panicking. She was planning. "We fight it, but we do it my way, methodically. By the book. Her book." My first step wasn't to call a lawyer or fire off an angry email. It was to document. I took out a fresh legal pad and a pen. At the top of the page, I wrote, "Operation Pizza Freedom." A little cheesy, maybe, but it helped frame it in terms I understood. I noted the date and time of Karen's unauthorized visit to my property. I wrote down her exact words, her threats, and Herb's silent complicity. I photographed the violation notice, the envelope, the certified mail receipt. Then I went to my filing cabinet and pulled out the thick binder I'd received at closing. The Oakmont Estates covenants, conditions, and restrictions. The HOA Bible. I spent the next 3 nights with a highlighter in one hand and a tumbler of bourbon in the other, poring over the 112-page document, a text so dense with legalese and passive-aggressive stipulations that it felt like it was designed to induce a coma. I read every single word. I read about lawn maintenance, fence heights, the approved palette of exterior paint colors, a thrilling spectrum from grayish to slightly darker grayish, and the rules governing satellite dishes. Finally, I got to Article 7, Architectural Control. And there it was. Section B, Paragraph 4, no building, fence, wall, or other structure shall be commenced, erected, or maintained upon the properties, nor shall any exterior addition to, or change, or alteration therein be made until the plans and specifications showing the nature, kind, shape, height, materials, and location of the same shall have been submitted to and approved in writing by the Architectural Review Committee. The key word was structure. The entire case rested on the definition of that word. The bylaws, however, conveniently failed to define it. It didn't specify what differentiated a structure from, say, a large piece of equipment or an outdoor appliance. This was the gray area, the legal ambiguity where HOA tyrants like Karen lived and thrived. They counted on homeowners being too intimidated or too busy to challenge their interpretation. My next step was to craft a response. I didn't argue. I didn't get emotional. I wrote a polite, formal letter to the HOA board. I acknowledged receipt of their notice. I stated clearly and concisely my position that the pizza oven is a cooking appliance, not a structure, and therefore not subject to Article 7. I respectfully requested that the board provide the specific definition of structure as used in the CC and RS, along with any precedent for classifying outdoor cooking equipment as such. To be helpful, I attached the manufacturer's specifications for Karen's own Blazemaster 5000 grill downloaded from the internet, which listed its weight at over 800 pounds and its permanent gas line installation requirements. I pointed out that, by her own logic, her grill and dozens of others in the neighborhood would also be illegal structures requiring demolition. It was a simple, logical counterprobe designed to test their defenses and expose the hypocrisy of their position. I sent it via certified mail, return receipt requested. The ball was in her court. Friday came, and Mike arrived as usual, a 6-pack of IPA in hand. The violation notice was sitting on the counter. He picked it up and read it, his brow furrowing. "A non-conforming structure?" he said, a slow grin spreading across his face. "Jack, this thing is built to a higher code than her garage. Did you pull a permit?" "Didn't need one," I said, sliding a pizza topped with pepperoni and hot honey into the glowing maw of the oven. "City ordinance exempts structures under 120 square feet of floor space that aren't intended for habitation. This slab is 64 square feet. It's classified the same as a garden shed or a large fountain." Mike nodded, his expression turning serious. "She's citing the HOA covenants, not city code. It's a private contract, but her interpretation is aggressive." He tapped the paper. "The lack of a clear definition for structure is where she's vulnerable. But she's also banking on the fact that fighting it will cost you more in legal fees than just tearing it down." "She's banking wrong," I said, pulling the sizzling pizza out and setting it on the cutting board. The smell of victory, or at least defiance, filled the air. "I'm not tearing down a single brick." Mike took a slice, the cheese stretching in a perfect triangle. "Good," he said, taking a bite, "because this is the best pizza in the Tri-County area. And I'm not just the building commissioner. I'm a paying customer in beer." We both knew he wasn't going to intervene officially, not yet. That would be an abuse of his power. But I also knew he was now a witness. He was an expert who had seen the monstrosity up close, who understood its construction, and who could, if ever asked in an official capacity, testify to its quality and its classification under municipal law. Karen thought she was isolating me. She had no idea I was having dinner with the rulebook every Friday night. The HOA's response arrived a week later. It was a single curt page. My request for a definition of structure was ignored. My comparison to her gas grill was dismissed as irrelevant and vexatious. The letter, signed by Karen as president, simply stated that the Architectural Review Committee, which I later learned consisted of Karen, Herb, and a woman who was Karen's close friend, had retroactively reviewed my case and formally denied my unsubmitted application. The daily fines were now in effect, and the total due was already listed as $350. They were doubling down. It was exactly what I expected. This wasn't about a consistent application of the rules. It was a personal power trip. Karen had been publicly challenged, and her ego wouldn't allow for a graceful retreat. This escalation was her way of reasserting dominance. Fine. If she wanted to play with paperwork, I could play too. My next move was to escalate my documentation. I started a dedicated binder, the one I'd labeled Operation Pizza Freedom. In the front, I placed a timeline of events. Every interaction, every letter, every threat was logged with dates and times. I created a section for correspondence with my letters and their responses in chronological order. I started a new section titled Precedent. Every evening after work, I'd take a slow, deliberate walk through the entire Oakmont Estates subdivision with my phone. I wasn't just getting exercise, I was conducting reconnaissance. I photographed every potential violation I could find. There was the house with the unapproved basketball hoop permanently cemented into the driveway. The home with a large, elaborate koi pond and waterfall feature, clearly a structure with a foundation and plumbing. There were sheds, gazebos, and oversized swing sets, none of which I'd ever seen mentioned in the HOA's scolding monthly newsletter. And then I hit the jackpot. On Karen's own property, tucked away behind her garage, partially hidden by a row of overgrown arborvitae, was a large custom-built greenhouse. It had a concrete foundation, aluminum framing, glass panels, and electrical wiring running to it. It was, by any reasonable definition, a structure, a far more complex and permanent one than my pizza oven. I took dozens of photos from the public sidewalk, using my phone's zoom to get clear shots. The next day, I submitted a Freedom of Information Act request to the city's building department for all permits issued for Karen's address over the last 10 years. Mike couldn't give me the information directly, but he told me the proper procedure to follow. Just file the request, he'd said over the phone. It's public record. I have to comply. A week later, the results came back. Permits had been pulled for her deck and for a kitchen remodel. There was no mention of a greenhouse. I then submitted a formal inquiry to the HOA board, again by certified mail. In the letter, I included a photograph of Karen's greenhouse. I politely asked if this structure had been approved by the Architectural Review Committee, and if so, could they provide a copy of the approved application for my reference, as I was trying to better understand the standards for acceptable auxiliary buildings. I was laying a trap of her own making. If she said it was approved, she would have to produce documents that I was fairly certain didn't exist. If she said it wasn't approved, she would be admitting to hypocrisy and selective enforcement. If she ignored the request, her silence would be damning in any future legal proceeding. The pressure was building. The fines on my account were now ticking past $1,000. In the monthly newsletter, a thinly veiled article appeared about maintaining community standards and the unpleasant but necessary duty of enforcing the covenants against unneighborly additions. It was a clear attempt to poison the well, to paint me as a troublemaker in the eyes of the community. Some neighbors started to look away when I waved. Others gave me a sympathetic, tight-lipped smile. They knew what was happening, but they were too afraid of being Karen's next target to speak up. But a few were getting angry. One evening, an older gentleman named George, a retired Marine, stopped me on my walk. "I saw that article," he grumbled, his voice low. "It's garbage. That woman fined my wife $200 because her rose bushes were 6 inches over the sidewalk line. 6 inches. She's a petty dictator." I listened and I nodded. "I'm documenting everything, George. Every little bit of hypocrisy." "Good," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "You need anything, you let me know. A lot of us are sick of her." It was the first crack in her wall of intimidation. She thought she was making an example of me, but she was inadvertently creating a resistance movement. She was so focused on the single tree that she failed to see the forest was catching fire. My legal binder was getting thicker. It was no longer just a defense. It was becoming a weapon, a meticulously organized, fact-checked, photo-documented weapon. And I was just getting started. I was an engineer. I understood that to bring down a structure, you don't just smash it with a sledgehammer. You study its design, You find the load-bearing walls, you identify the weakest points, and then you apply precise, overwhelming pressure until the whole thing collapses under its own weight. Karen's ego was her load-bearing wall, and her hypocrisy was the fault line running right through it. The HOA board, which was to say Karen, responded to my inquiry about her greenhouse with predictable silence. They simply ignored it. Instead, I received another letter, this one more aggressive than the last. The fines had now exceeded $2,000. The letter stated that if the amount was not paid and the offending structure not removed within 14 days, the board would hold a hearing to authorize their attorney to place a lien on my property. This was the nuclear option, and she was launching it. It was time to expand my operational theater from simple documentation to active alliance building. I knew from my conversation with George the Marine that I wasn't the only one in Karen's crosshairs. I needed to find the others. I spent a Saturday morning drafting a simple, non-confrontational survey. It was a single page with a few questions. Have you ever received a violation notice from the Oakmont HOA? If so, what was the nature of the violation? Do you believe the rule was applied fairly and consistently throughout the neighborhood? Would you be interested in joining a discussion with fellow homeowners about ensuring transparent and equitable enforcement of our community covenants? I made 100 copies. Then with my son Josh, I walked the entire neighborhood, placing a flyer in every mailbox. It was a quiet act of rebellion, a direct communication to my neighbors that bypassed Karen's controlled channels, like the newsletter. The response was slow at first, then it became a trickle, and then a flood. Emails started pouring in. An elderly woman, a widow named Mary, was being fined for a small memorial bird bath she'd placed in her garden for her late husband. A young family, the Patels, were cited for their children's brightly colored plastic playset, which was deemed aesthetically displeasing. A man who worked night shifts was repeatedly fined for putting his trash cans out the night before pickup, even though that was the only time he could do it. The stories were all different, but the theme was the same: petty, vindictive, and inconsistent enforcement of vaguely worded rules. Karen wasn't just a stickler for the bylaws. She was a predator who preyed on those she perceived as weak or unwilling to fight back. She had created a climate of fear, and my defiance was giving people the courage to speak out. I organized a meeting, not an official HOA meeting, but an informal gathering at my house, in the backyard, right next to the infamous pizza oven. I sent out an email to everyone who had responded to my survey. "Come for the conversation, stay for the pizza," I wrote. That Friday, my backyard was filled. I had expected maybe 10 or 15 people. Over 40 showed up. George the Marine was there, as was Mary the widow and the Patel family with their 2 young children. Neighbors who had previously been hesitant to make eye contact were now standing on my patio, sharing their stories in angry, hushed tones. I fired up the oven and Sarah and I churned out pizza after pizza. As people ate and talked, the fear began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of shared purpose. Mike, the building commissioner, was there too, in his usual spot, leaning against the prep counter with a beer. He wasn't there in any official capacity, just as my friend. But his presence was noted. People saw him eating pizza cooked in the illegal structure, and it lent a subtle but powerful legitimacy to our gathering. He listened quietly to the stories, his expression growing more and more troubled. After everyone had eaten, I stood on a patio chair and called for their attention. "Thank you all for coming," I began. "For a long time, many of us have felt isolated. We've received these notices, these fines, and we've felt like we were the only ones. We were told we were the problem, that we were the ones not being neighborly. But look around you. We are not alone." I held up my thick binder. "This is everything. Every letter, every photo, every email. I'm fighting this, not just for my pizza oven, but for Mary's bird bath, for the Patel's playset, for all of us. The HOA board is supposed to work for us, to protect our property values, not to be the personal enforcement squad of a petty tyrant. They've forgotten that. It's time we reminded them." A man in the back I didn't know called out, "But how? She controls the board. She'll just ignore us." "She will," I agreed, "which is why we don't just complain. We organize. The bylaws, the same ones she uses against us, have a provision for calling a special meeting of the homeowners if 10% of the residents sign a petition. They also have a provision for removing a board member for cause. We are going to collect signatures. We are going to force a public meeting. And we are going to present our evidence as a group. The mood in the yard shifted from frustration to empowerment. For the first time, they saw a viable path forward. I had a sign-up sheet and a copy of the petition ready. By the end of the night, we had signatures from over a third of the homes in the subdivision. More than enough to force her hand. As the crowd thinned out, Mike came over to me. "You've really stirred up the hornet's nest, Jack," he said, but he was smiling. "They're not hornets," I replied, watching George and Mr. Patel exchange phone numbers. "They're homeowners, and they're tired of being pushed around." "Just be careful," Mike cautioned. "She's going to get nasty when she feels cornered. Make sure your legal flank is covered." "I'm already on it," I said. I had already made a call to an old friend from my unit, a guy who had left the Army to become a lawyer. He was sharp, aggressive, and specialized in property law. And best of all, he owed me a favor. Karen thought she was fighting one stubborn veteran. She was about to find out she was fighting an entire community, and they were armed with pizza, petitions, and a very good lawyer. The formal petition to call a special meeting bearing the signatures of nearly half the homeowners in Oakman Estates landed on the HOA's desk like a grenade. According to the bylaws, the board was required to schedule the meeting within 30 days of receipt. Karen couldn't ignore this. It was a direct public challenge to her authority, executed perfectly according to the rules she claimed to cherish. Her response was predictable. An email went out to all residents from the official HOA account. It was a masterwork of passive-aggressive prose, dripping with condescension. She wrote of a small but vocal minority who were sowing discord and spreading misinformation. She framed the special meeting as a waste of community funds and time, a distraction from the important work of the board, which apparently consisted of measuring rose bushes and policing the color of mailboxes. She was trying to frame our movement as illegitimate, a fringe group of malcontents. But the petition, with its dozens and dozens of signatures, told a different story. The battle lines were drawn. The meeting was set for a Tuesday night in the rented conference room of the local library. This would be the main event. While the community was buzzing, I focused on preparing my trap. My lawyer friend Tom had reviewed my binder over a video call. "Jack, this is gold," he'd said, a predatory grin spreading across his face. "The selective enforcement, the lack of definitions, the undeclared structure on her own property. It's a textbook case of a board president abusing her power. We could sue her and the HOA into oblivion." "I don't want to sue, Tom," I told him. "I want to dismantle. I want her removed by the people she's been bullying. I want her to be held accountable in a public forum." "I like it," he'd said. "A public execution. Poetic. Okay, here's the play. The hearing for your lien is scheduled before the special meeting, right?" It was. Karen, in her arrogance, had scheduled her victory lap before the public reckoning. She intended to use the formal hearing to finalize the lien on my property, creating an example of what happens to those who defy her, just days before the community was set to gather. "Perfect," Tom said. "We use her hearing as our discovery process. She thinks it's about your pizza oven. We're going to make it about her greenhouse." Under Tom's guidance, I drafted and sent another certified letter to the HOA board. This one was a formal request for documents in preparation for my lien hearing. I requested a copy of the minutes from the Architectural Review Committee meeting where my unsubmitted application was denied. I requested all records of ARC applications, approved or denied, for the past 5 years in order to establish a baseline of community standards. And most importantly, I requested a copy of the approved application and plans for the greenhouse structure located at Karen's address. It was a formal legal request. If they refused to provide the documents, they would be in violation of their own rules regarding homeowner access to records, and it would give us grounds to have the hearing thrown out. If they provided them, which I knew they couldn't for the greenhouse, their hypocrisy would be officially on the record. It was a classic pincer movement. They were trapped between their own bylaws and their own lies. Meanwhile, I kept up the Friday pizza nights. They had become a symbol of defiance, a weekly rally for the growing resistance. The Friday before the hearing, Mike was there as always. He had followed the formal paper trail I was generating, as some of it now officially involved his department. "You subpoenaed the HOA for ARC records?" he asked, trying and failing to hide his amusement. "My lawyer called it a request for discovery," I said, sprinkling cheese on a pizza. "He says it's friendlier. And the greenhouse, you officially put it on the record?" "Yep. Asked for the approved plans. I'm very interested in seeing how it was constructed." Mike shook his head, a slow smile spreading. "Jack, you are a menace. You know they don't have any. She never pulled a city permit, so there's no way she filed one with the HOA. She's going to have to either admit she's a hypocrite or produce fraudulent documents. Either way, you've got her." He was right. But I wasn't just trying to catch her in a lie. I was building a case so airtight, so overwhelmingly documented, that when the time came, her downfall would be swift, absolute, and entirely of her own making. The day before the lien hearing, a thick envelope arrived from the HOA's lawyer. It contained a partial response to my request. They sent me a copy of the minutes from the ARC meeting. The minutes were laughable. The entire entry read, "The unapproved structure at 124 Chestnut Lane was reviewed. Motion to deny retroactive application by Karen. Seconded by Herb. Motion carries." There was no discussion, no reasoning, just a rubber stamp of Karen's decree. They included a heavily redacted list of other ARC approvals, but they flat out refused to provide the records for Karen's greenhouse, stating that the request was overly broad and intended to harass. Harass. She was accusing me of harassment. The woman who had trespassed on my property, threatened me, tried to put a lien on my home, and publicly slandered me, was now claiming to be a victim. The irony was so thick I could have cut it with a pizza wheel. "They took the bait," I told Tom over the phone. "They're stonewalling on the greenhouse." "Perfect," Tom said, his voice gleeful. "That's exactly what we wanted. Her refusal is now officially on record. We're not going to the hearing to argue about your oven anymore. We're going to ask a simple question. Why are there two sets of rules in Oakmont Estates? One for Karen and one for everyone else?" The stage was set. Karen thought she was walking into a simple administrative hearing to crush a rebellious homeowner. She had no idea she was walking into an ambush. The lien hearing was held in a small, soulless conference room at the office of the HOA's management company. The air was stale with the smell of old coffee and quiet desperation. The judges were three members of the HOA board. Karen looking smug and triumphant at the head of the table, Herb looking like he was about to have a panic attack, and the third member, a woman named Cynthia, who I knew was one of Karen's cronies. It was a kangaroo court, and I was the kangaroo. I sat on one side of the table. My lawyer, Tom, sat beside me, his briefcase open, a neat stack of files in front of him. On the other side sat Karen and the HOA's lawyer, a slick, condescending man named Bradley who looked like he was born wearing a suit. Karen opened the proceedings. "This hearing is to rule on the levying of a lien against the property at 124 Chestnut Lane, owned by Mr. Jack Miller, for failure to pay fines related to the construction of an unapproved structure." She said it with a finality, as if the outcome was already decided, which in her mind it was. Bradley, the HOA lawyer, then presented their case. It was short and arrogant. He held up the violation notice. He held up the certified mail receipts. He held up a photo of my pizza oven. "It is a simple matter," he concluded, steepling his fingers. "The covenants were violated. Notices were sent. Fines were levied and ignored. The board is well within its rights to place a lien on the property to secure its financial interests." He sat down, looking immensely pleased with himself. Karen smiled. "Mr. Miller, do you have anything to say in your defense?" she asked, her tone dripping with mock patience. I looked at Tom. He gave me a slight nod. "I do," I said, my voice calm and steady. "I ignored the binder about my oven. Instead, I picked up a single folder. I'm not here today to discuss the definition of a structure. I'm here to discuss the consistent and equitable application of the rules, which this board has a fiduciary duty to uphold." I slid a photograph across the table. It was a crystal clear shot of Karen's greenhouse. Could the board identify this structure? Karen's eyes widened. Bradley, the lawyer, snatched the photo. Objection, he sputtered. This is irrelevant. We are here to discuss the violation at Mr. Miller's property. On the contrary, Tom interjected, his voice smooth as silk. It is entirely relevant. My client is being accused of building an unapproved structure. We are attempting to understand the standard of approval. Mrs. Johnson, he said, addressing Karen by her last name, is that a greenhouse on your property? Karen flushed. Yes, it is. And was that structure submitted to and approved by the Architectural Review Committee, as per the rules you are attempting to enforce against my client? Bradley jumped to his feet. The board is not on trial here. Every board member who engages in selective enforcement is on trial before the community they claim to represent. Tom shot back, his voice hardening. Mrs. Johnson, it's a simple question. Did you get approval for your 200 square foot, fully wired, permanent greenhouse? Karen looked at her lawyer, who could only offer a helpless shrug. She was cornered. It was put up before I was on the board, she stammered. So the answer is no, Tom pressed. You did not get approval for your structure, but you are now trying to place a lien on my client's home for his? The air in the room went thick. Herb was visibly sweating. Cynthia was staring at the table. The foundation of Karen's authority was cracking right in front of them. Tom wasn't finished. He produced the letter where the board had refused to provide the greenhouse records. We formally requested the documentation for this structure, and you refused, claiming the request was harassment. Why would a simple request for public HOA records be considered harassment, unless there was something to hide? He then produced a certified copy of the city permit search for her address. And here we have the public record from the city's building department. No permit was ever pulled for this greenhouse, which means not only is it an HOA violation, it's also a city code violation. Mr. Miller's oven, on the other hand, he said, gesturing to me, is fully compliant with all city ordinances. My friend Mike, the head of the department, can attest to that. He let that name hang in the air. Mike, the building commissioner, the man whose name carried more weight on these matters than anyone else in the city. Karen's face went pale. She had assumed this was a closed system, a little kingdom where her word was law. She had never imagined that the outside world, with its actual laws and regulations, would be brought crashing into her star chamber. This is outrageous, she finally managed to say, her voice trembling with rage. This hearing is about Mr. Miller's violation. No, I said, speaking for the first time since my opening statement. This hearing is about your hypocrisy. You stand on the platform of rules and standards, but you don't apply them to yourself. You've been fining Mary, a widow, for a birdbath, while you have an unpermitted, unapproved building in your own backyard. You've been harassing families over the color of a swing set. You've used the HOA as your own personal fiefdom, and it ends today. I looked at Herb and Cynthia. The two of you have a choice. You can vote to put a lien on my property, and in doing so, you will be complicit in this corruption. And I assure you, we will then file a lawsuit against the HOA and every board member personally for breach of fiduciary duty. Or you can vote no, and we can begin the process of restoring some integrity to this community at the special meeting next week. Herb looked like he was going to be sick. He looked at Karen, then at me, then down at his trembling hands. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy. Finally, Herb cleared his throat. I vote no, he whispered. I vote to table this until the greenhouse issue can be investigated. All eyes turned to Cynthia. She looked at Karen's furious face, then at the mountain of evidence on our side of the table. She saw the lawsuit hanging in the air. Her instinct for self-preservation finally overrode her loyalty to Karen. I agree, she said, her voice barely audible. I vote no. Karen stared at them, her mouth agape in disbelief, betrayed, in her own throne room. This hearing is adjourned, she snarled, slamming her gavel on the table. She stormed out of the room without another word. Bradley, the lawyer, gathered his papers, a defeated slump to his shoulders. He knew he'd been outmaneuvered. We had won the battle. But the war, the fight for the soul of the community, would be decided next week, in front of everyone. The days leading up to the special meeting were thick with tension. News of what happened at the lien hearing spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Herb and Cynthia, fearing Karen's wrath but fearing a lawsuit more, had started talking. They told their sides of the story to their friends, who told their friends. The narrative was no longer about Jack the rule breaker. It was about Karen the hypocrite. My phone and email were buzzing nonstop. People I'd never spoken to before were reaching out, offering their support, sharing new stories of Karen's petty tyrannies. The movement was growing beyond the initial group who came to my pizza party. It was now a full-blown community uprising. Karen, for her part, went into siege mode. Another email blast went out, this one more unhinged than the last. She accused me of a coordinated campaign of personal attacks and slander. She claimed the special meeting was an illegal attempt to seize control of the board and warned that it would lead to chaos and declining property values. It was the desperate ranting of a dictator watching her power crumble. She was trying to scare people back into silence, but it had the opposite effect. It just made her look guilty and terrified. The night of the meeting, the library conference room was packed. They had to bring in extra chairs. Every seat was filled, and people were standing along the walls. I saw George the Marine, Mary the widow, the Patel family, and dozens of other faces I now recognized from our informal gatherings. I saw neighbors who had been on the fence, their curiosity and concern finally outweighing their fear. Tom, my lawyer, was there, sitting in the front row, not as a participant, but as an observer. His presence alone sent a clear message. The proceedings were being watched by legal eyes. The meeting was required by the bylaws to be run by the board president. So Karen, looking pale and furious, had to stand at the podium and face the community she had alienated. She banged the gavel. "This special meeting, called under duress, is now in session," she began, her voice tight. "The first and only item on the agenda is the petition submitted by Mr. Miller." She practically spat my name. "As per the bylaws, the floor is now open for the petitioners to state their case." I walked to the podium carrying my binder. The room was silent. I looked out at the faces of my neighbors. "My name is Jack Miller," I began, my voice clear and strong, "and I live at 124 Chestnut Lane. Many of you know me only as the guy with the pizza oven. According to our HOA president, that makes me a rule breaker, a problem. But the real problem isn't my pizza oven. The real problem is the abuse of power that has been wielded by our board president." I opened the binder. This all started with a violation notice. But it quickly became clear it wasn't about the rules. It was about intimidation. When I asked for clarification, I was ignored. When I pointed out inconsistencies, I was threatened. So I started asking other people, and I found I wasn't alone. I looked over at Mary. "Mary, would you mind telling everyone about your bird bath?" The elderly widow stood up, her voice trembling slightly at first, but growing stronger as she spoke. She told the story of her late husband, the garden they built together, and the small memorial bird bath she installed. She read the violation notice she received, the one calling her memorial unapproved lawn ornamentation. The room murmured in sympathy and disgust. Then Mr. Patel stood up and talked about the fines for his children's playset, how Karen had told his wife that their ethnic color choices were not in keeping with the community's aesthetic. A collective gasp went through the room. The accusation of racism hung heavy in the air. One by one, for nearly an hour, people stood up and told their stories. The man fined for his trash cans. The woman ordered to remove a welcome flag because it wasn't an American flag. The family harassed for planting sunflowers instead of the approved geraniums. It was a tidal wave of grievances, a public airing of the 1,000 tiny cuts inflicted by Karen's reign. The case against her wasn't being made by me, it was being made by the community itself. Finally, I stepped back to the podium. This isn't about any one rule. It's about a pattern of behavior. It's about selective and vindictive enforcement. And the ultimate proof of that, I said, my voice dropping for emphasis, is sitting in our president's own backyard. I projected the photo of her greenhouse onto the screen at the front of the room. This is a 200-square-foot greenhouse. It has a foundation, electrical, and plumbing. It is a structure by any definition, yet there is no record of it ever being approved by the ARC. When asked for the records, the board, under Mrs. Johnson's direction, refused. When we checked with the city, we found it was also built without a permit, a violation of municipal law. I looked directly at Karen. Her face was a mask of pure fury. The woman who wants to put a lien on my home for a fully compliant pizza oven is herself in violation of both HOA rules and city code. The hypocrisy is breathtaking. The room erupted. People were yelling, demanding answers. Karen banged the gavel repeatedly, screaming for order, but she had lost control completely. It was then that George, the retired Marine, stood up. His voice boomed through the chaos. I make a motion to remove Karen Johnson from her position as president and as a member of the HOA board for cause due to gross misconduct and breach of fiduciary duty. Second, shouted at least 20 people at once. Karen's face went white. You can't do that. That's not a legal motion, she shrieked. Actually, it is, Tom said, standing up from the front row. He held up a copy of the bylaws. Article 4, Section C. Any board member may be removed for cause by a majority vote of the homeowners present at a special meeting called for that purpose. This is that meeting. And the cause, he said, gesturing to the entire room, is overwhelming. The chaos subsided, replaced by a tense electric anticipation. A vote had been called. The moment of truth had arrived. Karen, cornered and desperate, was about to make her final, fatal mistake. Faced with a public mutiny and a legally sound motion for her removal, Karen's composure finally shattered. The carefully constructed facade of the calm, authoritative community leader dissolved into raw, sputtering rage. This is a coup, she shrieked from the podium, her voice cracking. A coordinated attack by a disgruntled rule breaker and his mob. You people have no idea what you're doing. I have built this community. I have protected your property values. Her eyes scanned the room, searching for an ally, a friendly face. But she found only a sea of stony, determined expressions. Her power had evaporated. She was no longer a president. She was just an angry woman in a library conference room. In her panic, she made a desperate, ill-conceived move. She pulled out her phone. You want to talk about rules? You want to talk about city code? She yelled, her fingers jabbing at the screen. Fine. Let's get the city involved. Let's get a real, official ruling on Mr. Miller's illegal fortress he's built back there. The room went quiet. People exchanged confused glances. What was she doing? She was dialing her phone, her voice loud and self-important. Yes, I need to report a code violation, an illegal structure at 124 Chestnut Lane. It's a massive brick building, a fire hazard. Yes, I want an inspector out there immediately. My name is Karen Johnson. I am the president of the Oakmont HOA. She hung up with a triumphant smirk, as if she had just played a winning card. There, she declared to the silent room. Now we'll see. When the city inspector comes and red tags his precious little oven, when he's forced to tear it down under a government order, you'll all see that I was right all along. I was only ever trying to uphold the standards you all claim to care about. A slow grin spread across my face. I couldn't have planned it better myself. She had just, in front of more than 100 witnesses, called in the cavalry. My cavalry. I saw Tom in the front row shake his head with a small, pitying smile. She had no idea what she had just done. She had taken the one person who had tried to remain a neutral observer, my friend Mike, and forced him onto the field of battle. Her arrogance had blinded her to the fact that her own illegal greenhouse was now a matter of public record. A complaint had been filed. An inspection would have to happen. And the man she had just summoned was the one person who knew the entire backstory. The vote for her removal was held. It was a simple show of hands. When the question was called, a forest of arms shot up in the air. It was nearly unanimous. Herb and Cynthia, seeing the inevitable, had even raised their hands against her. Karen was officially and humiliatingly removed from the board. She stood there, stunned into silence for a moment, before grabbing her things and storming out of the room, slamming the door behind her. The room erupted in applause and cheers. It was a cathartic release of years of pent-up frustration. George the Marine was elected interim president on the spot. The first motion he oversaw was the immediate and retroactive approval of my pizza oven, Mary's birdbath, and the Patel's playset, along with a full dismissal of all associated fines. Justice, it turned out, was a dish best served by a majority vote. The next morning, a crisp Wednesday, an official city building department vehicle pulled up to my house, and out of the driver's side stepped Mike. He was wearing his official inspector's polo shirt and holding a clipboard. He had a very serious professional look on his face, but I could see the laughter in his eyes. "Mr. Miller," he said in a loud, formal voice for the benefit of any watching neighbors, "I'm Mike Vance, Chief Building Inspector for the city. We received a complaint about a potential unpermitted structure on this property." "Of course, Inspector," I said, playing along. "Please come around back. I have nothing to hide." I led him to the backyard. He walked around the pizza oven, tapping the bricks, peering up the flue, measuring the concrete slab with a tape measure. He made notes on his clipboard, his face a mask of bureaucratic seriousness. Finally, he looked up at me. "Well, Mr. Miller," he declared, "after a thorough inspection, I can confirm that this structure is under the square footage requirement for a permit, is built with sound masonry practices, and poses no fire hazard whatsoever. In fact," he added, a smile finally breaking through, "it's a damn fine piece of work. This case is closed." He signed the bottom of his form with a flourish. "However," he said, his expression turning serious again, "while I'm in the neighborhood, it's department policy to address all open complaints, and it just so happens that an anonymous complaint was filed last night regarding a potential unpermitted greenhouse in this very subdivision. I have the address right here." He looked down at his clipboard. 148 Willow Creek Drive, the home of a Mrs. Karen Johnson. "Since I'm already here, I'd better go have a look. Professional diligence and all that." He gave me a broad wink. "Have a good day, Mr. Miller, and save me a slice on Friday." He walked back to his truck, and I watched as he drove down the street and turned onto Willow Creek Drive. The hunter had become the prey. The enforcer was about to be enforced upon. Karen, in her final act of spite, had inadvertently signed her own demolition order. It was a beautiful, ironic, and deeply satisfying moment. The war was over. The fallout from Karen's public self-destruction was swift and glorious. Mike's official inspection of her property was, by all accounts, a masterclass in procedural correctness. He found the greenhouse, of course. He also found that the electrical wiring running to it was not up to code, a serious fire hazard. The plumbing for her elaborate deck-mounted water feature was also an unpermitted addition. And in a stroke of beautiful karmic justice, the massive stainless steel grill she had once compared so favorably to my brick shack was discovered to have an improperly installed natural gas line, a significant explosion risk. She was issued a stack of violation notices so thick it looked like a novel. She was ordered to either bring all the unpermitted work up to code, which would require extensive and expensive retrofitting, or to demolish it all. The city gave her 30 days to comply, with steep daily fines attached. The Queen's castle was crumbling. Stripped of her power on the HOA board, she had no one to turn to. The cronies who had once supported her were now distancing themselves as fast as they could. Herb was nominated to be the new vice president under George, and his first act was to draft an apology to the community, promising a new era of transparency and fair governance. The special meeting had done more than just remove a tyrant. It had re-engaged the entire community. Committees were formed, volunteers stepped up, and people started talking to their neighbors again. The oppressive climate of fear was replaced by a collaborative spirit. The first official act of the new board was to conduct a complete review of the HOA's CC&Rs. They hired an independent lawyer to help them redraft the vague, ambiguous clauses that Karen had so effectively weaponized. The goal was to create rules that were clear, simple, and focused on genuine issues of safety and property value, not on personal taste or petty control. My binder, Operation Pizza Freedom, became a key piece of evidence in this process, a case study in how not to run a community association. The fines against me and everyone else were not just dismissed, they were formally expunged from the records, as if they had never existed. The lien on my property, which Karen had so eagerly anticipated, never materialized. Instead, a few weeks later, a certified letter arrived at her house from the city's legal department, informing her that a lien would be placed on her property if her code violations and fines were not rectified. The reversal was absolute. The weapon she had tried to use on me had been turned back on her, with devastating effect. The ultimate symbol of this new era came about a month later. It was a sunny Saturday afternoon. A large crew of workers was in Karen's backyard. Not gardeners or painters, but a demolition crew. They were tearing down the illegal greenhouse, dismantling the faulty water feature, and disconnecting the dangerous gas line. The sounds of sledgehammers and power saws echoed through the neighborhood, a symphony of consequences. Many of us stood in our own yards, watching the spectacle not with glee, but with a sense of solemn closure. It wasn't about celebrating her defeat, it was about witnessing the restoration of order. It was proof that when a community stands together, even the most entrenched bully can be brought down. That Friday, we hosted the biggest pizza party yet. The entire neighborhood was invited. My backyard was overflowing with people, with laughter, with the happy chaos of children playing. George the Marine was manning the grill, Mary was tending to the flower beds nearby, and the Patel family had brought a massive, delicious curry to share. It felt less like a party and more like a peace treaty celebration. Mike was there, of course, a slice of my signature pepperoni and basil pizza in one hand and a cold beer in the other. He leaned against the oven, the source of all the conflict, which now stood as a monument to our victory. "You know," he said, looking out at the crowd of happy neighbors, "you caused a whole lot of trouble for one man who just wanted to make pizza." I smiled, watching my wife Sarah chat with Mrs. Patel. "I didn't cause the trouble, Mike. I just refused to surrender to it. There's a difference." He nodded, taking a thoughtful bite of pizza. "That there is. A big difference." He looked at the oven, then back at me. "You ever think about what would have happened if you'd just torn it down like she asked?" I thought about it for a moment. The easy path. The path of least resistance. "Yeah, I have," I admitted. "And this," I said, gesturing to the scene around us, the families, the food, the sense of community reborn, this would have never happened. Sometimes you have to be willing to fight for your own backyard to remind everyone what a neighborhood is supposed to be about. The sun began to set, casting a warm golden glow over the yard. The aroma of baking dough, wood smoke, and contentment filled the air. My mission was complete. Peace had been restored, and justice, I reflected, is a dish best served hot, with extra cheese and shared with your neighbors.